1 in 4 pregnancies will end in abortion. And here's the kicker. The abortion rates, they're the same inside of our churches as outside. So we need to talk about, does the church have a place in the abortion debate today? Is this something that we should be addressing from the main pulpit, or is that going to drive away too many men and women from the church altogether? Is this maybe a conversation we should have behind closed doors? Then let's get back to the basics. Is abortion moral? Is abortion moral objectively? What does the Bible have to say about abortion? What do we need to know about this abortion debate as Christians, and how do we address it, or should we address it in church? Then we're also going to talk about the documentary One Child Nation, addressing China's one-child policy and now their current two-child policy. All that and more on this episode of Deconstructing the Culture. I am your host, Elisa Steele. Thank you so much for joining me today on today's episode. I've been a little bit hesitant to address this subject. I know I probably seems like a no-brainer. I'm talking to Christians, but I know a lot of y'all are church people, and maybe a lot of you have, just statistically, if you think about how many women have had abortions, maybe a lot of you have had an abortion. And so I want to be sensitive while also addressing this topic, because it's one that really needs to be addressed, especially within our church and Christian community. So we're going to talk about that today. Before I talk specifically about what the Bible has to say about abortion, I do want to briefly just talk about, from a kind of an objective view, is abortion moral? Before I do that, actually, real quick, can you just remember to subscribe, leave a review, like? If you listen on YouTube, go subscribe on iTunes, and vice versa. If you're on, whatever, wherever you're at, whatever podcasting app you're at, make sure you subscribe to both. I'm really working on trying to grow the YouTube channel right now, so that would be supreme. All right, now let's talk about objectively, is abortion moral? Now, this is something that and feel free to take notes if you want. This is something that is my standard, kind of, before you go into all the little bunny trails. This is kind of a standard, is abortion moral, that you can kind of have this conversation with anyone, whether they're Christian or not Christian, simply because it appeals to our common sense and making harmony within our arguments and not contradicting ourselves. So let me explain. If you ask someone, just someone who says they're not really sure if they're Christian or not, they're confused, whatever, you ask them, is abortion moral? And let's just say they say yes. Well, the thing is, we would have to first establish whether or not a human being have value, whether they have intrinsic value. Now, science would say that yes, human life does have value. And not only does human life have value, but even if that life wasn't human, because that's what some people will tell you, that this human being, this fetus, this embryo isn't human yet. Well, you would have to ask them, well, don't you agree that even if a life isn't necessarily human, that we do still have value and we do have rights? So for instance, dogs, cats, animals of all sorts, we know that they have value, whether or not they're human. We know that they have rights. We can't just torture them. We know this intrinsically on a gut level, that life has value. I would say, and most people would agree, that human life has a higher value. Now, there are some out there who say, a rat's life or a turtle's life is just as valuable and at the same level of value as human life. I don't agree with that. The people who do believe that are in the minority. But science agrees that human life has value, and it has unlimited value because we don't know where that human life is going to go. We also agree that life begins at conception. Now, there is no point when the human being isn't human. It doesn't continue to grow up and become a turtle or become a cat or become an alligator. That human being, if left in a healthy environment inside the mother to grow, it will grow through different development stages. It will be an embryo, an infant, a toddler, an adolescent, an adult, elderly. We go through stages as human beings in our growth development, but we wouldn't take an adolescent and say that based on their age, they're disposable, we can kill them. Whereas this full-grown adult or elderly person, they've been around longer, they're more developed, so therefore they're worth more. The same way goes for an embryo or a fetus. It's a stage in human development. And if we can establish that any human life has value, then you can work someone back and say, what point does this human being not have value because of their stage? And usually you can find someone kind of not trying to intentionally trap them, but you can get them to at least find an inconsistency in their argument that if human life has value, then just because it's a stage in life, a developmental stage in life, it doesn't mean that that human life is all of a sudden valueless. Now, the only way it would ever make sense to say that, yes, abortion is moral is if the child doesn't have any intrinsic value. Let's just say that who you're arguing with, they say, nope, child doesn't have any value, therefore the mother can abort it. But the problem is with that argument, and what's ironic is that all human beings, virtually every human being, we do believe that preborn children do have worth, that they do have value and a right to live, including leftists. And when do we all agree on this? We all agree that preborn children have rights when the mother wants the child. So if mom is 6 months along and she wants that child, we all agree that at that point, all of our laws and our society points to the fact that this child is very important, it is valuable, and if someone were to harm that mother with a 6-month-old child or whatever age, if someone were to harm a pregnant woman and cause her harm that would kill her preborn child, then that person, the perpetrator, could be prosecuted for homicide. So here we are as a society, all of us agreeing that if someone harms a pregnant mother and causes the child to die, that this person can be prosecuted for murder because that child does have value, it does have worth in the eyes of the law and in the eyes of society, but it's based on whether or not the mother wants the child. Does that make sense? So essentially, if the mother does not want to give birth to the child, then it becomes perfectly acceptable for the mother to decide the child has zero worth and she can pay someone to kill it in a clinic. And the person performing that killing of her preborn child won't be prosecuted for homicide. So if you see this extreme chasm in logic that doesn't make any sense, because on the one side, if the mother deems her child value, deems that she wants it, someone can be prosecuted for murder, for homicide. And then on the other hand, if the mother deems that child not worthy, then the person performing her abortion and killing her child will not be prosecuted for homicide. Now, that doesn't make sense because the preborn child either has rights or doesn't have rights. The rights do not come from the mother. And the way we know that the rights don't come from the mother is, as a society, we decide that humans have value. So for instance, if that same mother has the child, raises it till it's about a year old, and then decides that child no longer has value to her, that child is no longer convenient in her life, it doesn't make sense for her to have it, it's financially straining, she doesn't want to, it's her body, her choice, she doesn't want to use her body to support this child, to take care of this child, to feed this child, to wake up in the middle of the night, to change his diapers, whatever it is that she doesn't like about raising her 1-year-old child anymore, she cannot then decide the child no longer has value and kill the child. We as a society have laws against that, and we're also all appalled. We would never allow a mother to kill her 1-year-old child because she no longer wants it. The mother is no longer able to decide whether or not the child has value or not. We don't allow mothers to determine the value. Let's just put it that way. We decide as a society that child does have value, it does have rights, and we intervene if a mother or a father or anyone deems that child as non-valuable. Now the question is, why does it make any sense to allow the mother to decide the value of the child and to decide the child's rights when they haven't exited the vaginal canal, when they're younger, when they're a little younger in the child human development phase of their life? It doesn't make sense. A child's rights are not based upon their age. A child doesn't have rights after it's born, but before it's born, its mother determines its value. We already can see that from our laws as a society. Now, the main argument thrown at me at this point in an argument with someone is, well, the preborn baby can't survive without the mother when it's still in the mother's womb. But the obvious answer is, yeah, it can't survive without the mother, but neither can a 1-year-old. A 1-year-old physically cannot survive without its mother. It has to be bathed, dressed, changed, fed constantly. It can't survive on its own. The same way a preborn child cannot survive without a full-time constant caretaker. If you left the child alone for an hour, it'd probably kill itself. Now, I'm frequently told that, a woman gets to decide over her body. It's her body, her choice. The obvious answer is that it is not her body. Science tells us that it is a separate body within a body. It has its own DNA from conception. Otherwise, if it was her body, then she would have 20 toes, 20 fingers, 2 hearts, 2 brains, etc. We know that's not the case. Science tells us that's not the case. Also, just common sense tells us that's the case. We don't go up to pregnant women and say, "How's your body?" No, we say, "How is your baby?" Because we intrinsically know a pregnant woman is not just a body with some extra pounds on it, and then after the child comes out of the vaginal canal, then she has a baby. No, we ask a pregnant woman, "How is your baby?" Not "How is your body?" It's also just common sense, even if we didn't have science on our side, but we do have science on our side. Now, another argument, which I could spend a whole day on, and I'm actually currently writing a speech on, but we get the argument thrown at us, what about quality of life? What if that child's going to come onto this earth deformed, or it will suffer, or it's born into a family that's struggling in poverty, which, again, I could talk about for a long time because I was born into poverty and into a less than ideal situation. But speaking just along our same argument line here is, first off, we have to understand that we're all guaranteed a life of suffering. We will all suffer. End of story. It's just part of living. And so if you follow that argument that a child will suffer in its life and therefore we should kill it, then we should kill everyone on this earth, because we will all suffer. Suffering is not a reason to kill a human being. Another thing is, putting that aside, children diagnosed with disabilities or genetic defects, they're frequently killed in today's world. I think it's in the United States, 60% of Down syndrome babies are killed in the womb, which is tragic. And it's because the parents don't want to raise a child with those traits. But what happens, and what's to stop human beings from deciding whatever trait that they don't want in a baby and killing it for whatever trait it is they don't want to deal with? So for instance, what if we just started killing all the little girls, which happens in China because baby boys are preferred and baby girls are aborted selectively because of their gender? Then one of my favorite arguments, and this is an argument that Dennis Prager brings up, is what if we had somehow the technology and we had a machine that could detect whether or not a child was going to be gay or transgender? And what if a parent then decided they don't want to deal with that? They don't want that trait, the same way they don't want a child with Down syndrome because it's not perfect in their eyes. I'm not saying this is right. I'm saying, following the line of logic, if you can kill a human child because it has traits that you don't like, then if we could see if a child was going to be gay or transgender in the womb, and we selectively killed gay and transgender babies, how far are leftists going to let this logic lead them on? How far can we go before leftists step forward and recognize this practice for the disgusting and gruesome madness that it is, stripping human worth and rights? Dennis Prager also says, a direct quote from him, "Good societies can survive people doing immoral things, but a good society cannot survive if it calls immoral things moral." We have to call abortion what it is, whether you're a Christian or not. It's immoral. All right? Now, let's just talk about some of the basic Bible verses. As a Christian, you should know. I'd really highly recommend that you write these down because we all need to know these, especially as Christian pro-lifers. So who creates the unborn? From a biblical perspective, who's the creator of the unborn? That would be God. In Isaiah 44:24, it says, "Thus thus says the Lord, your Redeemer, and the one who formed you from the womb. I, the Lord, am the maker of all things, stretched out the heavens by myself, spreading out the earth all alone. God says he makes us. He is the maker of all things. He formed us in our mother's womb. We are God's creation. In Isaiah 64:8, it says, but now, O Lord, thou art our Father. We are the clay, and thou art potter, and all of us are the work of thy hand. We are God's handiwork. We are made in his image. And it also says in Psalms 139:13-16, for I formed my inward parts. You covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, and that my soul knows well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret and skillfully wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. Your eyes saw my substance, being yet unformed, and in your book they all were written. The days fashioned for me, and yet there were none of them. We are God knew us before our mothers even knew that we were in their womb. And it says, before I formed you in the womb, this is Jeremiah 1:5. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet in the nations. Behold, children are a gift from the Lord. A fruit of the womb is a reward. That's Psalms 127, verse 3. One of my favorites, showing the humanity, just showing the full humanity of children in the womb, is just the story of Elizabeth hearing Mary's greeting, and the baby, it says the baby leaped from in her womb, and Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit, saying, as soon as the sound of your greeting reached my ears, the baby in my womb leapt for joy. That's Luke 1:41 and 44. Now, how do we know that we cannot kill the unborn? Specifically, sometimes I'll have leftists tell me the Bible never specifically addresses abortion. No, but the Bible does specifically address children in the womb, which we just covered, and it does specifically address not killing. It says in Exodus 20, verse 1, then God spoke all these words, saying, you shall not murder. In Deuteronomy 30:19, it says, I call heaven and earth to record this day against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore choose life, that both thou and thy seed may live. It tells us in the Bible in Deuteronomy to choose life. And then it says here in Exodus 21:22-25, if men who are fighting hit a pregnant woman and she gives birth prematurely, but there is no serious injury, the offender must be fined whatever the woman's husband demands and the court allows. But if there is a serious injury, so for instance, if the child is killed, if there is a serious injury, you are to take life for life. It's specifically talking about pregnant women here, and it's saying to take life for life. That means the life of the mother and the child. Eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise. That's Exodus 21:22-25. That's specifically addressing the rights of the preborn. That their life does matter, and you should take life for life. It's talking about pregnant women. I don't know how any clearer you could be. Now, this is another subject altogether that I'm probably going to make a whole podcast on, but specifically, what does the Bible have to say about or what verse could we find to find clarity in whether or not we should kill children who are conceived through rape? Now, obviously, I've talked about this past, and I'll talk about it again in the future, but two wrongs don't make a right. And the Bible specifically says in Deuteronomy 24:16, fathers shall not be put to death for their children, and nor children be put to death for their fathers. A person shall be put to death for his own sin. Now, I believe that when we kill children because they're conceived in rape, we're putting the child to death and killing a child because of the sins of the father. And that is not fair, just based on this verse alone, but also common sense. It doesn't make any sense to punish and kill an innocent child because a great trauma happened. It's inflicting also two traumas on a woman, which is awful. Now, before I move on, I'm going to ask you to please subscribe, leave a review, especially on iTunes and YouTube. It really helps with the ranking. Share this video or podcast, whatever format you're listening or watching in. Really means a lot, especially if you have Christian friends who maybe they're wondering, how do I address people who attack me in my faith and tell me that, we shouldn't talk about abortion in the church. That's what we're going to talk about next. Now, Okay, this is the tricky part. Should abortion be addressed in church? I would say, and not all of you are going to agree with me. So actually, first, before I tell you what I'm thinking, a lot of times the number one argument I hear from people is we can't talk about abortion from the main pulpit because abortion is so widespread and so many women have had an abortion, that we're going to drive too many people away from the church. We're going to hurt too many people. We're going to close their hearts off to Jesus altogether if we address abortion from the main pulpit. Therefore, this is a conversation that we should only have like in small groups and pulled aside separately, and we should only talk about this one-on-one, not from the pulpit. Now, here's the truth. That's not right. I'm sorry, but it's not. And if that's what your church is telling you, I would challenge them in that and challenge them to read their Bibles and become convicted on this. Because the truth is, this is our human rights crisis. In the same way, someone could have made an argument that slavery shouldn't be talked about in church because we might offend people. We might drive people away from Jesus. We can't condemn their lifestyle. We can't condemn, their life choices. We might drive them. No, if they're not, if your fellow Christ followers, if your people in your church are not convicted of Christ's message, what is the point of them even being there? And part of Christ's message is that we are his creation and we're not to take innocent life. Of course, we should be talking about abortion in the church. And it drives me absolutely mad that this is not something we talk about all the time. This is a huge issue. And in so many churches, I see more and more nowadays, it's becoming popular. I know it sounds gross, but it's becoming popular for churches to talk about human trafficking. We'll talk about human trafficking all day long. We'll talk about it at our women's events, at our women's retreats, at our passing. We'll spend tons of money setting up big exhibits talking about human trafficking and helping people to understand how huge this issue is and how we need to address it. And now today, we must not fail. We must put our efforts toward this. We must pour our money into this. We must talk about this from main pulpit multiple times every year. We'll talk about human trafficking, but somehow that's okay, but it's not okay to talk about how abortion is a huge part of human trafficking, and abortion is used to cover up and hide human trafficking and incest and rape and all the horrible things happening in our world. Abortion is a big part of it. You cannot just ignore that part. You also can't ignore the fact that millions of babies are being killed every year and that they are God's children, and it is our duty to stand up and protect them and share what God's word has to say about the value of human life. The truth is, 1 in 4 pregnancies will end in abortion today. I mean, God willing, this is going to change, but right now, 1 in 4 pregnancies end in abortion, and the abortion rate is the same inside the church as outside. And it's because we're not talking about it in church, and we must talk about this in church. This is not a subject we can be quiet on to try and not make people leave church. If people are uncomfortable, that is a sign that there's some discomfort that needs to be addressed, that there's sin. You wouldn't not talk about the harms of pornography and human trafficking because, oh no, what if we make people who watch pornography and watch human trafficking, and what if people who are buying other human beings, what if we make them uncomfortable? What if they stop coming to church? What if they should feel uncomfortable? Their heart should be convicted that there is something deeply wrong that must be addressed and fought against this evil. If women are uncomfortable with abortion, yes, that's a conversation that should hopefully happen one-on-one with their spiritual leaders, but also it needs to be addressed from main pulpit because there's a lot of women who just don't know, especially young women who are just getting lies fed to them from TikTok or Snapchat or wherever it is that they're getting this information, which is super. I don't know if you've been on those platforms, guys, but this information is hardcore pressed on our youth, especially Snapchat is like one of the worst platforms for pushing this pro-abortion nonsense, and even coming out with articles, I've talked about this in the past, explaining to teenagers how to get an abortion behind their parents' back, step by step, trying to walk them through it. This is stuff that's being daily pushed upon our children in their public schools, in their social groups, in their social media, which has more time with them one-on-one than you parents do most of the time today. And so we think that it's fine for the rest of the world to constantly bombarding and talking to our young people about this, but then we shouldn't be talking about this in church. No, we should be talking about this in high school youth groups and in weekends with parents and high school students alike. We should be talking about the sanctity of life and the fact that this is a huge human rights issue, and we should be addressing this. The fact that so many women, I believe the percentage is like at least 50% or 60% of women, I need to go check on the statistic, but it's a large percentage of women who go get abortions and claim to be a Christian and profess to be a Christian. That's huge. We are failing as a church if we're not speaking about abortion. We are not doing our job if we're not talking about abortion front and center, same stage. We spent all this time talking about how we need to surround ourselves with the right friends, and how we need to surround ourselves with like the right people, and how we need to, give more money to the church, but we're not talking about saving human souls, about not killing our unborn, one of the largest human rights crises of our time, and we're not talking about that. Reality check. God's people need to hear about this, and they're not hearing about it at church. And if they're not hearing about it at church, where are they going to hear it? Because it's not going to be on Snapchat. It's not going to be on social media. They're not going to get this message anywhere else if the church doesn't step forward and talk about this. So yes, the answer is yes, every church, every Christian church should be talking about this. And I don't mean in a harsh, condemning way. I mean with love. And that brings me to my next topic, which is embrace grace. If you look at this sweater, if you're watching on YouTube, this beautiful, it's like a dusty rose pink. I talked about actually the message last week. This says, it says unworthy, and then it crossed out on, it says worthy. I talked about last week about the self-love movement and how we aren't worthy. We are completely not worth anything, and you don't find self-worth through yourself or through your, self-care or whatever it is. Our worthiness comes through Jesus Christ. We are only worth anything. We only have any value through Jesus Christ as our Savior. But go listen to last week's episode if you want to hear more about that. But Embrace Grace is a beautiful organization. They are created to and designed to partner with churches, because I even talked with some of their staff, and one of them was telling me the story about how a pastor's wife was telling her, oh, we don't need to talk about abortion because the women here don't get abortions. Like, we don't need to talk about that. Our congregation doesn't struggle with that, which is ridiculous and shows you how naive some of our pastors today are. The fact is that your congregation is filled with women who need this message, who need to know the truth, because they are having abortions. And the fact is that the abortion rate is the same in as outside of the church. And the fact is, our Christian women need this message just as much as the rest of the world. Now, one thing I love about Embrace Grace is they are all about being God's hands and feet, about loving the women who come in with crisis pregnancies. They're about not shaming them. The baby is not a punishment. The baby is not, to be looked down on. They're not. The child is innocent, and we love to love on them. One of my favorite things that they do is they assemble love boxes, and they give love boxes specifically to women who've decided to keep their baby. So this is what a love box looks like. As you can see, a sample, and I asked them to send me a sample box so I could show you what's in their love box. And just to briefly kind of show you what's in a love box, would go to a woman who with a crisis pregnancy has this beautiful, beautiful wrapping paper. And my favorite part of it is the first part of it, which is a brave girl letter. These come from people like me and you who write Dear Brave Girl letters. And inside, I'm gonna open this, inside this Dear Brave Girl letter is a message written from volunteers and people all over the country who write, Dear Brave Girl, this says, you are so brave. You have got this. Don't worry. You are going to be a great mom. God's hand is on you. You are never alone. Hold on to that promise. And it says love, and then it has a person's first name. These are letters that you and I can write. This is one of the most beautiful ways that you can get involved, is to write a Dear Brave Girl letter to a girl who's decided to keep her child, to keep the baby that God has created in her. It comes with this beautiful onesie that says best gift ever. And how sweet is that little onesie? I think it's probably a newborn, or 0 to 6 months or something, or 3 to 6 months. So I love that. It has a You're Invited and more information about how they can be supported by Embrace Grace. It has some more information. One of my favorites is this beautiful, beautiful book written by Amy Ford. It's called A Bump in Life, True Stories of Hope and Courage During an Unplanned Pregnancy. And this is their second edition, and it's beautiful, just beautiful stories about girls who have kept their babies. And then this beautiful, it says, you are strong, you are brave, you are loved. It's a journal with prompts. and it has prompts in there to help girls kind of get started with words of encouragement. This one says a few things that make me feel loved, a few things that make me feel brave and strong, or just some beautiful actions I can take today to overcome my fears and take a step towards my dreams. Just beautiful prompts. This is a journal prompt. So just the best way to get a woman started and encouraged her to do the right thing and to move forward and just find God's grace and be accepted, be loved, be supported through this journey of keeping her baby and not doing it the secular way. This is a little bit of what you would find in a love box. Now, I love this concept. I love the idea of Embrace Grace coming alongside churches and teaching the church, hey, we obviously believe in Christ-like principles. We don't believe in sex before marriage. We believe in, all these things that line up. But, and here's the but, in our culture, we are having this crisis of Christian women still getting abortions. We need to talk about this. We need to address it. We need to find a way to support them. So Embrace Grace says, on their website, you can find some more information. It says, having an unplanned pregnancy can be scary, and many who experience one feel completely alone. Fear and shame can lead women, including moms with kids already, to make abortion a decision they eventually regret, which triggers more fear, shame, and trauma. Pro-life is a stance, but being pro-love is an action. We can't look away from reality any longer. The church can be a part of the solution that saves lives both physically and eternally. And their dream, their mission, their dream is for every young woman who experiences an unplanned pregnancy to have a safe church to turn for healing, hope, and help in her local area. There are 3 ways you can get involved with Embrace Grace. I highly recommend, first of all, my number 1 recommendation is find out if your church has an organization like Embrace Grace. And if it's not cutting the bill, or if you don't have one at all, find out how you can start a group. Go to embracegrace.org. You can find out how to start a group, or figure out someone else who can bring Embrace Grace to your church. We want Embrace Grace in every single church. I'm a huge believer in this. We don't get paid for any of this. I'm just promoting this because this is the number 1 way I think our churches need to get involved. Bring in Embrace Grace and Grace group to their church and support the young women who are in crisis, unplanned pregnancies. And another way that you can get involved is you can help assemble these love boxes that I just showed you. You can get together a group of maybe your women's Bible study, or even just a group of fellow pro-lifers, both men and women, and assemble these boxes to help provide the love and support that these girls need to move forward with their pregnancies. Or you can make a donation. That's something I also am a huge believer in, is donate to make this a possibility for every church in America and maybe throughout the world to have an Embrace Grace branch of their church that can help save lives, as they said, both physically and eternally. All right, so thank you so much for listening to that part. That's like something I've been wanting to talk to you about here on the podcast in depth for a while, and I'm super excited to have been able to talk about it here today. Definitely go check out Embrace Grace. Now, before we continue on and end with good in the world, I'm going to go a little over, but that was worth it. We're going to talk about the One Child Nation movie. Now, some of you may have already heard me talk about this. It's funny because I watched this documentary, quite a few months ago when it first came out, and I thought I talked about it on the podcast already because I talked about it so much in just like everyday life, and I think I even talked about it on Instagram. But then I realized, I'm like, I don't think I talked about it on the podcast, which is not good. Now, One Child Nation is a documentary that came out in 2019, so not too long ago. And if you didn't already know anything about China's one-child policy, you need to watch this. And even if you do know about one-child policy, you need to watch this. It is truly, it will convict you even more about the pro-life movement and just saving babies. So a little bit about it is, after becoming a mother, a filmmaker uncovers the untold story of China's one-child policy and the generations of parents and children forever shaped by this social experiment. China's one-child policy lasted from 1979 to 2015. So it only ended 5 years ago. Now, something I want to tell you right now, it is rated R, and it's rated R for a reason. It is truly gruesome. It shows just how horrible China went and how far they went. They talk about even the human trafficking that started, about the abandoned babies just being killed by flies, mosquitoes, sun exposure because people couldn't keep their second child. It talks about the forced sterilizations, the forced abortions, the horrible things, people burning down their fellow villagers' houses because of more than one child, or not having a forced sterilization, forced abortion. Truly, truly, truly eye-opening. But here's the thing that two things I want to address about this documentary. First of all, you need to go watch it. It's on Amazon Prime. But two things about this is, at the end of the documentary, after showing all of the horrible, terrible things that happened in China under the one-child policy, this filmmaker ends with talking about how she loves her son and she wants a sibling for her son. She's so glad that she gets to have a sibling. You know, she has the option or choice to have a second child, and she lives in America now. I should tell you that. But then she ends, the very end of the whole documentary feels so intensely pro-life, talking how awful and awful this policy was. And then she ends with this one little quote. She says, "I left a country where the government forced women to abort and moved to a country where the government restricts abortions." She's talking about America. On the surface, they seem like opposites, but both are about taking away women's control of their own bodies. Telling me this girl still has a lot more to learn, because she still thinks, after seeing everything she's seen the humanity of the babies killed and discarded, the forced abortions, the terrible things. She's seeing that and not seeing how that's awful to abort, and saying that it's awful also in the United States that we control a woman's body and try and stop them from killing their children. So it totally throws you off. Other than that crazy tiny quote at the end, which really throws you off, the rest of the documentary is A plus, A plus, like 1,000. It's really good. Really recommend you watch it. Only watch it with your mature children, obviously, because it is really intense. Especially some of the visuals. The only thing also, the last thing I want to talk about here is, we kind of tend to think, oh, child's one policy thing, it's over. We don't need to be worried about it. Like, all that's over and in the past. But she's showing a documentary of all the terrible things happened because of a one-child policy. China's the same today. So everything you saw in that documentary, or will see in that documentary, is still happening today. Of course, she doesn't talk about that, but it's still happening today. And do you know why? Because China has a two-child policy now. So yeah, people won't be forced to be sterilized after their first child. No, they'll be forced to be sterilized after their second child. And no, they won't be forced to have an abortion after their first child. No, now they'll be forced to have a child after their second child. But there will still be forced abortions. There'll still be forced sterilizations. There'll still be children abandoned and put on the black market. There'll still be children dying of exposure or being suffocated right after they're born. All of these issues that you see in this documentary are still happening, because China is still limiting how many children people can have. And this will continue. It doesn't matter if you have a 5-child policy. All these terrible things will happen as long as the government says, you can only have this many children, and if you do more, then we're going to kill your child. We're going to force sterilize you. We're going to do this, that, and the other. All this evil is still happening. It hasn't ended because the one-child policy is over. It's still happening. Okay? Just, anyways, all that to say, go watch the documentary. It is truly eye-opening. Now, ending real quick with good in the world. I love this beautiful story. This is a news story from Good News Network. And there's this moving company that helps women leave abusive homes at no cost, which is a beautiful act of service. Essentially, there are hundreds of women who have had Aaron and Evan Steele thank for coming to their rescue. These owners of a California moving company have volunteered to complete the move for them free of charge. When they first started their business, Meathead Movers, in 1997, as high school athletes, they were simply looking for a way to earn some extra cash. Back then, their fee was $20 and pizza. But then as their business grew, the Steeds started getting occasional frantic phone calls from women with little or no money who wanted to quickly move before their abusers returned home. These beautiful men, inside and out, they declined any money or compensation and rushed the address to load their belongings. One day in 2000, a situation turned volatile when an abuser came home in the middle of the move. It was then that the company decided that they had to ensure that these women and moving crew were both safe, so they partnered with a local women's shelter. Since then, they've continued on. Every time they open a new branch, they immediately partner with a local pregnancy pregnancy, or excuse me, not pregnancy. They partner with the local women's shelter, which is beautiful. And because of that, they're vetting the requests for help. They're supporting the women with counseling, making sure that they get what they want. Proper restraining orders are in place. Police are on hand if necessary. Meathead CEO Aaron Steele told Good News Network. Beth Rabb, a director of the local women's shelter, said that one of their staff is always on site the day of the move so they can call law enforcement if things get dicey. Since then, the company has launched a new campaign that asks other business to get creative and help victims of domestic violence. They're called Move to End DV. The Meathead Movers hope to inspire others to rethink how they can work with shelters or help women as they try to rebuild their lives. And some of our ideas for business is to offer free security systems, a dog kennel service, or for an auto mechanic to provide oil changes. Aaron said all those little things that would help defer costs of starting over. Beautiful, inside it out. I love, I don't know if these men are Christian, but their actions are Christ-like, helping those in need, helping these women who are suffering from domestic violence, and inspiring others to help and give to women in need. And this especially, without going into it too much, this especially speaks to my heart because my mom was a survivor of domestic abuse. My biological father was not only a polygamist with, my mom was his fifth wife, but also he was an abusive alcoholic. And so for her, what gave her the courage to leave was someone helping her. And that was two female police officers giving her the courage to get out of the abuse cycle. So this story really just touched my heart and kind of made my heart bleed a little because I've not been through this personally, but I see the strength it took for my mom. And even my mom is fierce as hell. She needed somebody to encourage her and to be that person to help her get out of an abusive situation. So for that, I'm so thankful for these men and the change and beautiful work that they're inspiring in others. So God bless these Steed brothers. God bless you. God bless America. Hey there. So you're at the end of the podcast, and I'm going to ask you to please, if you haven't already, subscribe and leave a review. And if you've already done those two things and you're like, Elisa, I hear you say that every week, and I've already done that. What else do you want me to do? This is the time I would like to tell you what else I'd like you to do. No, I'm being serious though. Please share this with a friend, with a like-minded friend, or maybe a friend who doesn't know much about the pro-life movement or doesn't know much about the conservative movement. Maybe as an introduction, maybe as someone who is a tried and true conservative who you just feel like our personalities might resonate. Who knows? But I'm asking you to please take that next step and go ahead and share this with a friend or two or a dozen. I don't care. Actually, maybe 30, however you want. You be generous. You decide. All right. Thanks. Bye.